This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
It's a real pleasure. Is this a good spot for you? Yeah? And the information I'm going to share right now, I'm going to go through it fairly fast, but I'd like to show you as much as I can, because there's many disciplines here that I'd like to show you. So that's the thing. I'd like to try to get to a certain point in the break, so I'm going to take questions at the end, if that's okay with everybody. This way I can go right through it. I'm going to go over the shroud and the rainbow body, and I'll explain all this. And then after, I'm going to go into the value of it and from a heart intelligence point of view and the model that I've developed for explaining the Shroud's image. Okay? But I'm going to have to do it fairly fast, some of the images. I won't get into detail on some of it because for that you need to get the book. Okay? So, and I'd like to thank RVML and Bruce and Jordan for inviting me up here. I'm glad I have the opportunity to come up right now. And before I begin, I'll give you a little history about myself. I began as a student of human potentiality because I saw things that did not make sense according to the model that I was witnessing in books and reading about. And so I studied mystical traditions around the planet, and every time I did, it seemed like there was a different practice, a different person. Nothing really seemed to make sense, but it distilled down to the heart. It distilled down to love. So you could talk to this guy over in India or this fellow over or some Sufi. And it distilled down to love. And they all talked about the sacred or purified, immaculate heart. The heart is light as a feather. So sometime in the early 90s, we decided that if it was possible, we were going to try to create a device, a tool, to measure and to see if there was such a heart, a physical heart. If you felt certain things, would it produce certain things? And we had a geometric and mathematical model of what that would represent. And then in 96, we set up a company down in California, my friend Richard Bornholt and myself, to produce this. And there was a fellow from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that had a device. He was from the Air Force. He was the Human Machine Systems Interface Analyst. He looked at how people and machines operated when the machines were complex, when the computers got complex. So he developed devices that we were able to use and tweak to be able to look at the heart. And at that same time, now remember, this is 96, computers were just getting fast enough. I mean, today what we have is amazing. But in 96, just getting on the line and going through dial-up, remember those days? It was pretty darn slow. So the information that we produced during that time demonstrated to us in real way, in real time. And by the way, a lot of the information that we were working with, Leonard Lasko, who's here with us tonight, who is really a pioneer and a real gentleman, he put out that information on the power and the beauty of love. And we were looking for a way to actually measure it, to find out that we all can talk about it, but how do you know when that space exists? And so we found a model and a working tool. Now we created a device. We were out there testing it. It was working, and we were finding that it was pretty nice stuff that we were working with. And all of a sudden, in 2000, my son, who was 27 at the time, he passed away suddenly on my daughter's birthday. And during the events that happened during those weeks after his passing, I had an epiphany while I was cleaning out his apartment to connect up the Shroud of Turin with the heart intelligence. Now, I knew nothing about the Shroud of Turin in 2000. Now I have quite a bit more information under my belt because I've spent so much time researching it and talking to the people that have actually looked at the shroud, that have actually done the work on the shroud. And that's what I'm trying to impart to you. And the thing that struck me that I'm trying to impart to you before I actually get into the slide presentation is that the information, the shroud itself, the scientific evidence that's being produced is changing science. Science, to fit the model, is having to be moved into a new paradigm to understand the object, regardless of what you might have seen on National Geographic or the Discovery Channel. The people that have done the work have actually moved themselves to a new way of understanding to try to find out how the image and all the anomalies got on this piece of cloth, which, by the way, if you had it and you wanted to pull it up on yourself at night to go to sleep, would feel like a new cloth, even though realistically it's 2,000 years old. And it's gone through fires and traveling and all sorts of things. And all these objects that are found on it, it's not just the image itself, there's lots of other things that go with it. So it's moving the science, the actual image and the discovery of what's embedded in it, but also the exploration of what this means is moving a lot. The entire way we perceive, the way we exist, our reality, the way we view ourselves in reality. Those individuals that have actually looked at the object that come up with this, and I'll show you now. And the object itself, let me see if we can get this working here. How's that? The Silent Gospel, the name of my book. Am I in your way? Okay. Where do I go for comfort? Everybody's pointing in different directions. Is that good? Yeah. Anyway, the Silent Gospel, the name of the book, is the Shroud of Turin. And the reason it's called the Silent Gospel is because there's information that it's telling us. It's a testament, a message, that it's talking to us, and it's talking to us about something that we can only know now. The information, this is all information that, before that it was an article of faith. But now this is actually coming forward as an actual message that this is sharing. I just want to move out of the camera. So this is, the actual image is a negative, okay, that we're talking about. It's an object that's 14 feet long, and it has been mapped extensively. It has been photographed with everything. But I'm going to go back in time and give you a little bit of history on it. This guy, and this is another interesting point, Geoffroy de Charnay brought this forward in 1349, 1350. His name, he's the namesake and nephew of the guy who was burned at the stake, was Jacques Molay, the Templar in Paris. And I don't know how much you know about the Templars, but it's just interesting that this gentleman brings this forward, and the Templars, he literally is a direct connection to the man that was burned with the Grand Master in Paris in 1307. The key fact here is that this thing, this object, this article, was given over to this family in 1464. And the Savoy family, it kept this object until 1983. The Roman Catholic Church did not have possession of this at all. This belonged to a royal family in Europe. And they've had it in their possession from 1464 till 1983. And that's a key point here to remember, because they traveled all around. When they moved from site to site, they brought this article with them. There was a fire in Chambry that they thought these poker holes were created from. And in 1534, the Clares, the St. Clares, the nuns, they sewed patches on the back for some of the repairs. And the shroud is moved because there's a war going on in France, and it's returned back to Chambry in 1561. And the reason I bring this up is because in 1516 we found paintings with the holes marked here. These are the poker holes. This is a painting, but it shows them. And these poker holes I'll point out, go back in time, but I'm just giving you a quick history of the shroud. By 1598, there's a public exhibition, and the shroud is shown, and this is a painting of that, and you can see all the bishops holding it up. And then by 1694, it's placed in the new cathedral in Turin that's in today, the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. And so from 1349, 1350 to the present time, there's a clear history of the shroud. We know who had it, what dates it was out, and there's lots of it. I have a document here that I could bring out, and it's pages long of everywhere it was and who had it and when it was shown. Because when the royal families had other royals come over, they wanted to see it. They brought it out, and it was noted. So this time is really the critical time, because on May 28th, 1898, not long ago, photography is in its infancy. This amateur photographer, he's a lawyer, Secunda Pia, he's asked with two of his friends, photography buddies, to photograph the shroud for the first time for this exhibition. The City Fathers do that. And it's his pictures that when he's developing this picture, the negative shows up, the positive image that's on the shroud. And the reason this is important is because the scientific exploration only begins, let's say, in 1900. Fairly recent history, considering the date of the object. In 1931, Giuseppe Ani, he takes this photograph of the image. And this is important because it's this photograph that we'll see later shows up very important in the what transpires. In 73, Max Frey, this gentleman was a criminologist. He gets together and he secretly is allowed to take sticky tape samples of the shroud and another piece of material. And the interesting point here is that these sticky tape samples that he takes, he analyzes, and some of the stuff that's found is quite extraordinary. That Giuseppe Henri picture that I just showed you, these fellows are working over at Los Alamos lab, John Jackson and Bill Motton, and these guys are literally have this picture that was taken of the shroud from Giuseppe Ani. And they happen to say, wouldn't it be fun to see what happens when we put it through our VP8 analyzer? The VP8 analyzer was put together for looking at images coming from outer space, specifically the moon in the 60s, in the early 70s. And these images would come and they'd put together the topography that they were looking at from the images. That's what this device was made for. There's about 8 of them in the world. And when they put the image, not the shroud, the image through this analyzer, they came up with a 3-dimensionally encoded image. And they said, well, that's interesting. I wonder how that happens. So they couldn't figure it out. So the same year, this is the other little bit of information that triggers the events that you'll see. In the same year, Max Frey says, there's something interesting here. He has this group of friends, scientists, that he calls the Shroud of Turin Scientific Commission. And he announces in 1976 that the pollens found on the shroud are plants exclusively to Israel and Turkey. And he has 58 pollen species on the shroud identified. And the interesting thing for Max is that not in France or Italy. In other words, the pollen in the flowers, stuff that he found on there, comes from the area around Jerusalem. It gets more interesting. There are at least 7 small bouquets that are found in the imaging on the shroud. There's over 100 flowers. Most of them are indistinguishable, but there's 100 flowers known on the shroud. And out of these, later on in 97, we find that there's 28 plants, known plants on the shroud, that they actually identify which one it is. Okay? Now this is pretty amazing stuff. 23 are flowers, 3 of them are small bushes, and 2 are thorns. 27 of them bloom in April and March when the resurrection and the crucifixion happen. And by the way, I'm not here to promote any ism I'm not trying to promote Catholicism or Buddhism or Sufism or any ism. If in fact the opposite is true. Because what the message is telling us is all the power is with you. And nobody can help you with that, really. Gurus can help you a little bit. Teachers and healers can help you a little bit. But in the end, the information, it really resides with yourself. So the picture comes back, and they have this 3D picture from the VP8 analyzer. And here we have the scientists wondering how that happened. So they're talking to their other scientists. And then Max Fry comes back and says all these pollens come from Israel and the area around Palestine. And so they put together this group of scientists, 24 of them, that's called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP. And STURP goes over there and for 120 hours has total access to the shroud. They take every conceivable picture with every conceivable level of spectrum they can. They look at it, sticky tape. They do all sorts of diagnostic material on it, and they take that away. In 81, they take their findings to the former king, living now in Portugal, and they present the findings. In 83, the former king passes away, and he, for very good reasons, which I won't get into right here, but just to say it's a lot of political stuff going on here at this time, and that the shroud is then turned over to the Pope. So now we're saying that after 83 is when, after all the legal stuff comes on, is when the Catholic Church actually gets custodialship for this. And interesting, before and during these events, the World Court and the Court of Europe turned his former palace into a World Heritage Site. And one of the only provisos that he gives is that the shroud remains in Turin in this site. So he says, you can have it, but it can't go anywhere, right? So the Roman Catholic Church takes custodialship now of the shroud, and they allow for this small bit of material to be cut from the bottom and sent for carbon-14 testing. And when they take these, it's all filmed, and they take the pieces, it's all being filmed, they take it into a back room where it's not filmed, they cut it up into 3 small pieces, they put it in vials, and they send it to 3 institutions. The institutions do their test, and what comes back is that the date of this object is 1290 to 1360. So everybody says, well, it's a fake. Nobody tries to figure out, even if that date was accurate, nobody still can understand how the image was created and how the anomalies were created that goes with it. And I'll show some of the anomalies later on, and they are extraordinary. But literally by 2005, it's been proven that the carbon-14 dating was invalid. There's many, many issues with it. Starches and bacteria on it that were proven to be invalid. So now we say, okay, we know what's happened up to the current time with the shroud. What about the circumstantial evidence? Circumstantial evidence begins in 325 with this guy, Eusebius, down here. He is literally one of the key gentlemen at the Council of Nicaea. And that's set up by the Constantine to create the church, the governing church. And what he presents is very fascinating because most people won't talk about this, and you try to understand what the rationale is. But he presents papers from the king of Edessa, who ruled between 13 and 50 AD. And let me just turn there. I think I have, yeah. So he has documents for that gentleman writing to Jesus a letter saying, I'm sick, I'm the king of Edessa. I'm paraphrasing and bringing it up to date. But he says basically, I'm sick and I could use some help here. And I hear you're having a tough time in Jerusalem. Why don't you come spend time here in Edessa? And Jesus of Nazareth writes back a nice, kind letter that's dictated through Thomas, that's sent back and says, no, I have things to finish here. When my ascension is done, and I'm finished in Jerusalem, I will send somebody that will help you out. Have faith. And he presents this information, because they're looking at all the different Gospels at that time. And I bring that up is only because the person that goes to Edessa is Thaddeus Jude. And Thaddeus Jude brings an image that some thought was a painting and they didn't know what it was. But that's the first mention of it that we know of. And then what happens in history is anything having to do with Jerusalem at that time is not good. They've just caused a whole lot of trouble for Rome. Rome at this point in 60 AD, 70 AD is leveling Jerusalem. They're everything. So what happens, the king finally dies about that time. His son takes over and says, we better hide this for posterity until things cool down. Well, it doesn't show back up again until 544. In fact, it might have been 525. But 544, we know factually that this object shows back up, which is then called the Cloth of Edessa. They build a church for it. And the Roman Emperor at that time, by 900, he basically says, this isn't right for Edessa to have it. It should be in the capital. So he sends his army to go pick it up. And they go over there in 944. They get the shroud forcibly from Edessa. The Edessans fight them off trying to save it and keep it there, but because it's protected their city for all these years. Remember, we're talking 525 to 944, hundreds of years. It's in a church. People are worshiping it. And by the way, remember the image. It's of a naked man in negative that's been tortured and brutalized. Okay?
Where is Edessa?
It's in Turkey. So the root, it seems to be, goes to Edessa. This is the object we're calling the Shroud of Turin. This is circumstantial evidence. But if you look at the details, it's pretty clear that this is what happened. It goes to Edessa, maybe Antioch for a time, goes back to Edessa, then it ends up going to Constantinople, and then it finds its way to Athens. We know that. And then probably it goes to Venice first. But the long and the short is it goes through over to France, it goes to Chambéry, and then to Turin. This is the object we know of as the shroud. And I've just put it here briefly for the longer formats that I have. I like to go into this because it hammers home the history of this object and how interesting it is that it survived all it's gone through. We're talking floods and wars and traveling and being picked up. It's a priceless, literally what happens is the French Crusaders invade Constantinople, they destroy it, and they bring home all the treasures and the relics back to France. So this is the history of this object. And what's interesting about this, circumstantially, is that the image on the shroud and the images of Jesus, the early images we have, and there's very few early images of Jesus, and there's a reason for that. When the Muslims started to militarily win, the Pope at the time decided that it wasn't good. Why was God favoring them and not us? And the reason he came up with was because we were worshiping idols and images, and the Muslims were not. And this is the same fight that's continuing to this date. And so most of the images were destroyed to try to, because they thought that would favor, God would favor that. So we don't have a lot. But there are mosaics and frescoes from the 6th century on, and they all have a very interesting similarity. And those similarities, this Paul Vignon, they're called the Venial Markings, because he studied the early images, and as it turned out, he studied them with the image on the shroud. Okay, this is from the 30s and 40s. And I know this is small right now and hard to read, but it's only here to illustrate that at this point, there's at least 12 known consistent markings on images that all relate back to the shroud. They have to do with the eyes, under the lips, the hair, this little curl here at the top of the head. And I'm going to burn through a few images here just to show you that these images, this is one of the earliest, this is over in the Sinai at the monastery of St. Catherine's at the foot of Mount Sinai. And this image dates from 550. And when they took it with the shroud, and I'm just showing, this is just one more little piece to throw value onto what I'm going to tell you later, is that they mapped it with sophisticated mapping tools, computerized mapping tools, and it's a match. So this face and the face on the shroud originated from the same source. This face and the face come from the same source. And that's not where it begins. This is that same image with the shroud in the cathedral. Here's an image from 1100 in the dome. Again, these little pieces here, all these little markings that Paul Vignon found show up, and they are all throughout the early images. And it suggests strongly that the images all originate from a common source. So the image, and there's more to that even. But here's an early document. It's a book called the Hungarian or Prague Codex. And one of the images in this, one of the 5 illustrations, actually, I'll read it right here. One of the 5 illustrations in the manuscript shows Jesus being placed on his burial shroud. And the importance that they found is that the body, the way the body was shown is the same as the shroud. Plus, there's no fingers, there's no thumbs shown. And the reason for that, you'll see later, was because where they put the nail through, the thumb automatically goes underneath. And there's many other little characteristics that they found. But another interesting thing they found was the burn holes. And this, again, is from 1192 to 1195. That was before the invasion of Constantinople in 1204. So somebody had seen this object and had copied it. The burn holes, the poker holes as they're called, which might have been from incense or something else. There are 52 known occasions in the documentation where paintings were done of the shroud. And those paintings, when they were finished, were allowed to touch the edge of the shroud to sanctify it. This one here is from 1568. Again, the poker holes you can see. There's another interesting bit of information, and it's called the Morabic Rite, I believe that's how you say it. And this is a saying, a preface of a saying that's used in a ritual in Spain, and it really comes from the Celtic tradition, I believe. But there's one saying that's in one of the prefaces, and it says, Peter ran with John to the tomb and saw the recent imprints of the dead and risen man on the linens. And remember, we're talking 579 here. And what scholars have a hard time figuring is, well, where did such an idea come from? It didn't come from the Bibles. It didn't come from the art. Where did that idea arise? So they looked into it a little bit, and there was a bishop from the area there that did go to Constantinople. And the theory was that he saw, during that time, the shroud in Constantinople, or the cloth or the burial cloth, or the cloth of Edessa. Then we have the sudarium. The sudarium was the cloth, like a handkerchief, that was put over the face when the man died. Jewish custom allowed that when the person died, they would allow to put a cloth over the face. So they put this cloth, called the sudarium, over the face of this man. And it was said to be, it came from Palestine, it has clear provenance, and it went from Palestine to Spain. So we know who owned it all the way along its trail. And it's been in Spain a long time, and it's Has no image on it per se, but it has blood, forensic evidence, and staining on it. And it's been mapped extensively. And they found 70 points of correlation on the front of the sudarium and 50 on the back that match, in computer matching, the image of the shroud, the face of the shroud. And the other bit of information is that the blood, which is AB, and the lymph material match. And we don't have DNA, but we do have the forensic evidence, and that matches with the sudarium. And the sudarium clearly comes from Palestine. Everybody is known who had it during those periods of time. And the reason I'm going through all this is because it's clear that the shroud has a history, and that it originated in Jerusalem, in Palestine, back in the 1st century. And even if it didn't, if it did come, which has now been proven not to, come from the time, let's say 1300, still, what we're left with is the image. And in this image, there's coins, and coins on the eyes. And these coins, when they're looked at in detail and mapped, they come up with that the coin comes from 31. They're from Pilate. Okay? But again, remember that this image is in negative. And here we have on this image in negative, not only the body, but coins and flowers. There's also rock dust that's been taken from the feet. It's a calcite, it's a travertine. And this rock dust, the crystalline structure perfectly matches that which they found in Jerusalem. They've looked everywhere else, and they've not found it. So even if it didn't come directly from the feet of the man who was put in the shroud, no forger would think to go over to Jerusalem to get a little rock dust to put on the shroud to forge it for the year 1300. All of this is beyond the pale. This object is mapped for blood, wax, dirt, where the material was taken, the burn holes, the wounds, the flowers, the forensic material. It is exquisitely mapped and layered in detail by the scientists. Okay? It's all been looked at. And the position of the body was like in this position. It's about 6 foot, the person that was laying in it when he's stretched out. And the image itself, this is the most amazing. The image itself is on the cloth is flax. And the flax fiber has a starch on it. Starch and sugars. And this starch is what the image is on. It's 1/100th of a human hair in thickness. It's 200 to 800 nanometers thick. But the image, when it was produced, it was probably much more brilliant than it is today 2,000 years later after being in sunlight and being handled and shown. But this image is literally in such good resolution, regardless. I'm going to go back to this picture. You see the way the body is. So the cloth isn't touching every part of the body. It's touching maybe on the nose, it's away from on the cheek. It's touching, on the chest or on the knees, but it's not touching on the abdomen or where the hands are. And so, but yet the image that's on the shroud is perfect resolution. So you think of taking a photograph, you have to have the right aperture setting, you have to have the right, for me to take a picture of you, you have to have the right distance set up, and then everything around it goes into not being in perfect resolution. This image, when they've looked at it, is in picoseconds. It has to be within fractions of a second in accuracy for it to happen, or else you don't have an image. You have a blur. It's like you can say intentionally created. I'm stretching it, but that's literally what it points to. An explanation to understand this object must be scientifically sound from a physical, chemical, biological, archaeological, and medical viewpoint. And when the people that know this image look at it, it's clear to them that this image had a human body in it that was tortured, brutally tortured, and that was near or at the moment of death. The actual mapping of all the wounds, all the evidence reflects, ideally, the biblical story. The crucifixion, the spear, the location of the spear, the thorns. Remember, we have the wood from the object. We know the thorns that were used on the. We can see the wounds from all these things. The actual type of instruments that were used to whip him. All of this evidence, the forensic evidence, is clear. It's clear from the 1900s to the current moment in time. All of that evidence, what it points to, is that a man at or near the moment of death somehow produced an image not only of himself in negative, but these flowers and the coins on the eyes. And oh, by the way, he did it in a way that produced a dimensionally encoded imaging on the shroud, so that when you take a picture of this, it produces dimensionally encoded information of the individual that was laying in there. So somehow the light that produced this, the energy that produced this tonal browning image, first off, there was no heat used because there was no fluorescence on the image. It was a cool heat or light, radiation, if you will. And that radiation was produced in a way to produce that image on the shroud. And I don't know, but that's where science is at. And that a person at or near the moment of death did that. So from my understanding from heart intelligence and the mystical traditions and the power and the beauty of love and compassion, I looked at it from a different perspective, a perspective that most scientists won't look at it from. Because you try to find a model for that to occur, but you don't want to look at it from the point of view of a man that forensically tells you we're at or near the moment of death producing the image. Because if they look at it from that perspective, somehow this man produced a light, like a Xerox, that produced a negative image in perfect resolution of not only himself, but the flowers and the coins on his eyes, at or near death on top of it. It's extraordinary. So science can't go there. They can't push themselves to look at that possibility. But yet all the other possibilities don't make sense. You can do it to make sense with pieces of it. And that's what you see on TV. But you do not see a model that encompasses all the anomalies and characteristics that are present. And the only way to do that is to look to the East and see what they say. And what they tell us is that it's possible for a man and a woman to attain mastery over themselves. And at the moment, if this mastery develops to a certain level, they have the ability to transcend this dimensional existence and attain the garment of light. And that garment of light, from a Buddhist tradition, is called the rainbow body. And it's well delineated, the process. And not only the process, but people that have done it, how it happened to them, and by the way, some of the characteristics on what happens during that process. The person literally starts to, at the moment of death, by the way, there's 3 places you can do it and ways to do it from the literature to attain the body of light. First off, when you become awakened to your true nature, and you learn the skill to contemplate exquisitely in that state, say samadhi. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that term, but when you attain a certain level, you can actually produce within yourself a level of meditating in the void. And these individuals that meditate in the void, they surrender their identity back to the void, or the emptiness, to the stillness. And when they surrender all their identity back, their body dissolves back to their original components, and a flash of light occurs, and they're gone. Okay? From physics, it's looked at as a phase transition. Padmasambhava, he is the patron saint of Tibet, for those that don't know. He is the man that came from India to bring that understanding of Buddhism to Tibet in about the 8th century. When he came to Tibet, he found the Bon living there, and the Bon had a religion already that encompassed similar ideas. It's the Bon Po. And so it was a nice marriage. He brought something to accentuate the information they already were using, and they were developing this. And this is one individual, and there are several other in the literature that you can find, that literally during his waking life, not at the moment of death, transitioned into a body of light. And that's the hardest thing to attain, is to do it then. And there's rationale in the modeling for that. This, by the way, Dzogchen is the great completion. That's what it's known as, the final or great completion. And that's everybody's job on the planet. That's their idea. They say everybody will do that at some point. We're here to attain this state. This is when we leave this state fully. And the interesting part about it is that if you look at the transfiguration and the resurrection and the ascension story, and you look at the Buddhist philosophy or Hindu philosophy, Taoist philosophy, even Christian philosophies, they mirror each other, the stories. The only difference is one says you all are going to do it, and the other one says you need my help to help you do that. And only the man himself said everybody will do what he did and much more at some point. I like this Alex Gray photo. He allowed me to use it, and I just liked it because it actually shows the transfiguring into the kingdom of light. But the process itself doesn't have to be full attainment. There's several. I have so much information on this that I could spend a day on just this information alone. But there are many individuals that do not corrupt when they die. And that process can go from 5 to 6 days to forever, to literally shrinking in size. The smallest size they shrink to is about 18 inches, to literally dissolving parts of their body, to dissolving all their body away. Okay, so the process I'm talking about of gaining the rainbow body is not just disappearing, ascending like fully imploding, your body dissolves and you're gone. These individuals do it too, but they do it from the Bodhisattva tradition, which they leave back their body as a symbol of what's possible. And this individual, who was 73, died in 78 in the jungles of Thailand. The Traveling Mummy Roadshow, which some of you may have seen, took this individual, put him through a CAT scan, and found out, because they said it was okay, the abbot said, oh, sure, go ahead. They put him through a CAT scan, and they found that he still had all his organs intact. He's not mummified in any way, and he's still sitting in lotus there. Oh, by the way, we're talking the jungles of Thailand. They did build a little stupa, a little temple for him now, and he's now a tourist, site to go visit and help make money. And they put the glasses on him because he was a little unnerving looking at his eyes. This is I like this image only because this is Saint Bernadette, and my sweetie over here, Patty, and I, we went over to Italy, and we really we went to see Saint Clare, and she also is in the uncorrupted state. An interesting fact that I'll share here is that most of the individuals in the Eastern traditions that are recorded are men that have attained this. They're not all men. The ones that are recorded, they mostly are men, but not all men. But in Christianity and the religions in the West, most of them are women. Just an interesting fact. I don't have what it's for or why it's there. Maybe it's because they allowed the nunneries or whatever. But it's interesting that most of the Christian individuals that do not corrupt are women. And there's several. I mean, there's like 40 or 50 of them that we know of, right, that are still here. And there's, in the Western traditions, they're mostly men that have gone. And they're not visible, most of them. Most of them are buried. When Yogananda left his body in the early 50s down in L.A., he was 21 days with the coroner. And for 21 days, he was perfect. His body didn't corrupt at all. It was still soft, and he smelled like roses. And finally, they closed the casket, and he took him away. He says, I don't know. And he wrote his report, and you can find the report. But that's not, there's many of these cases. There's some recent ones that happened over in New Jersey. How in New Jersey, a Buddhist monk. You don't see it on TV, but here he goes, and they want to have a puja for him, correct? And like, they want to burn his body after he starts to corrupt, if he starts to corrupt. And what happens is that they have to bring the city officials in. They have to bring the coroner and everybody and say, yeah, he's really dead. We're not burning a live person here. This is New Jersey. So this is still ongoing. There's recent cases of rainbow body happening over in Tibet right now that the Chinese have been talking about. And one of the individuals that I've met early on in this is a Francis Tiso. He's a Father Francis Tiso. He's a Catholic priest. And he's studying the rainbow body for the Vatican. Good news. And he's writing a book on Milarepa right now, which is the patron saint of Tibet. His specialty is the icons and the art of Tibet. And he's found the rainbow body correlates to the resurrection. And he's bringing the cultures together a little bit. I think right now he's in Washington, but it's a beautiful story that what's going on with the science surrounding this topic. Because, again, it has to do with each of us here. This is not about them. It comes back to each of us here. So, if we want, we can take a quick break right here, okay? Because after this quick break, I want to get right into the information on the heart and how this process actually unfolds within each of us. How does that sound? Okay. And okay. Are we all back and we're ready to go? Okay. So, again, the whole reason for talking about the shroud is to really help you explain the model of how the image came. And the image came through a process that has to do with love and caring and compassion. And I'll explain how that is. So, if the image is Jesus, Jesus' message is about love and compassion. So he's telling us similar things that all great masters have told us. He begins with the heart, and he begins with love. And the icons point to it. Whether it's Mary, they're pointing to this sacred heart. And I just want to point out that this is not idealized in some way. It's trying to represent an actual heart. He's trying to give you information here. So, this quote in the Bible is one of the ones that really moved me forward into this process of understanding this in Matthew. Jesus was asked by a scholar of the law that was testing him. He said, the teacher asked, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus wasn't to be fooled in this particular quote. And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." But he said one more thing. He said, 1,000 half-loves must be forsaken to bring one whole heart. Jesus is telling you that to love your God, not my God, not the Catholic God, not the Buddhist God, your God. He's telling you to start, he starts with your heart. The word, your heart, your soul, and lastly, your mind. And why? Because that's the way the process is best to unfold. Open your heart, you connect with your soul, and the mind comes along for the ride. Okay? And in doing that, you have to forsake all these other half-loves, okay, to bring one whole heart into being. And the one whole heart is the key here. This is from Sri Yukteswar's book. Sri Yukteswar was Yogananda's guru, and The Holy Science is the name of his book. And I really like this book and recommend it for anybody that really wants to get a handle between Christianity and Hindu philosophy, because he's talking about this whole process. And he says the ultimate aim of the heart is affected when ignorance is emaciated and existence, consciousness, and bliss are attained. Basically, when you awaken to your true nature, ignorance is gone. Okay? It's not gone forever. It's just put in its place. It's surrendered to its place, its rightful place. Then existence and consciousness and bliss are the fruits of it. And then he says, in this state, once you've achieved this state, which is basically total, sustainable, awakened illumination, okay? Enlightenment, if you will. In this state, all the necessities having been attained and the ultimate aim affected, the ultimate aim again is up here, okay? You've attained existence, consciousness, and bliss, okay? The heart is purified. The heart becomes perfectly purified, and instead of merely reflecting the spiritual light, actively manifests the same. Man, being thus consecrated or anointed by the Holy Spirit, becomes Christ, the anointed Savior. Entering the kingdom of spiritual light, he becomes a son of God. This unification of self with God is the ultimate object of all created beings. It's clear. This is it. Okay? Now, Sri Yukteswar was an Indian sage, a Hindu saint, and he's using the same terminologies. And this process is really what we're talking about here. And it starts with the heart. And the heart is the main physical oscillating platform organizer for all the other movements of the body. Think of the body as a collection, whether it's a system or a little piece or a part, of vibrations. They're all moving. The organizer for this in the body is the heart. You can be brain dead and yet still alive as long as your heart's going. And the heart requires no outside source to operate. And it has neural cells like the brain. They're even much more exquisite, actually, because they're embedded in the tissue of the heart. And there's much more to that. The heart is not just a pump. It literally communicates energy and information, and it transfers this energy and information to all the body, okay? And it does it through electrical, acoustical, chemical, neurological, and quantum modes, okay? The easiest one for us to measure is the electrical ones, because we have a handle on that, the easiest. We have tools and devices that measure it the easiest in the body. And since we see the body as electromagnetic phenomena, this is from the physics literature, anything that comes into being in mass and matter, you can look at as a vibrating oscillation happening in space. And we're just a major big collection of them, a complex collection of them. Even DNA is just a molecule, which is a collection of atoms put together, and they're all vibrating. The heart communicates. Hardwired, it communicates. And when you look at the electrical nature, this is just to give you an idea. This is analog. The body's operating in analog. But this computer operates in digital. So if we want to read it and look at it interesting and really, put it together, we got to take this analog wave, okay, that our body's producing and talking to our body, all the pieces of our body, the systems of our body, and we have to convert it into a digital format. And those individual frequencies, oscillations of energy, when you put them together, is known as a harmonic. Okay? This is our original device that we first built back in the 95-96 time window. And we were looking for figuring out not the harmonic. This is the harmonic. Here's your heart information rolling along the bottom, like your ECG, right? Like you would go to the doctor. And it takes the information in the beat and it breaks it apart. And the best way to understand that is if I clap my hands, it sounds like one sound. But if I take the spectral analysis of that one sound, look at the frequencies played, there's a symphony being unfolding there of frequencies. Music is happening. And so if you look at the long waves, the low waves, here, right? This is the actual information that's present within one of those beats. Not all of the information, there's more. It goes out farther past 20 hertz here. Hertz, by the way, are cycles per second. It's a measurement of energy and time. And that's a very critical piece of information. And what we were looking for was to see what the relationships were. What could we find a signature in all this information that was going to be informative to what was going on? And we had a model based geometrically and mathematically on the golden ratio, on phi. And this is HRV information. This is heart rate variability information. This is this information here relates to what's going on up above. If there's a lot of order in the harmonic, you see it down below as order here. Where the order is and how fast the spacing is between frequencies is measured right here. Okay? And I don't want to get stuck in the technical details of this at this point because we don't have the time. The reason I'm going through this right now is just to give you an idea that this information that we're looking at digitally is representative of a wave. This frequency that I'm looking at as a peak is representing a wave. Within the heart signature, I'm going to go back here one second. Down here at the bottom, this is known as heart rate variability. And what they found is a level of understanding in researching the heart that in the long, low waves of the heart, there were relationships to the autonomic nervous system in your breath. Right? The beat-to-beat relationships in your breath. And what they found out was there was a definite correlation between positive and good HRV, which they had a model for, and health and wellness. And oh, by the way, getting rid of chronic illnesses and building self-esteem and cellular longevity. So there was definite medical correlation to having positive HRV and wellness. The autonomic nervous system are the parts of your body that speed you up and slow you down. We're measuring the heart right now, remember? And in the heart, these two areas are measured in these two frequency windows or spectrum windows. But what it's measuring is literally a waveform. Okay? Within each beat, it's a waveform that we're measuring. I'm going to keep hammering it home because it's the waveform that where I find all the interesting information. But all the details everybody's looking at are on the computer in the digital readouts. But what it's reflecting, what this information back here is reflecting, is something having to do with the waveform. And the waveform is in relationship to this number right here, and it's very ordered at this moment in time. And it has a one-to-one relationship, which is more like a circle versus 1-to-phi ratio, which I'll expand upon slightly in a little bit. So this waveform, by the way, this is a neutrino down here. This is a model of a neutrino, and they have the same type. Neutrinos aren't even thought to have mass, but yet they have this shape that comes together in the waveform. The waveform of the body and the waveform that the heart produces is toroidal. Let me go back there. It's literally a very powerful image. It looks like an apple. That's the easiest way to see it, with a vortex coming in at the top and at the bottom. This is not the best image I have, but the thing is, this is from Arthur Winfrey's book, When Time Breaks Down, and he looked at information having to do with the heart and cardiac arrhythmia, and he was looking at the model of the waveform, and he wanted to figure it out, and he produced this wonderful image, the computer image. This is made from putting the electrodes all around the body, and the computer figures out what it looks like, and it looks like a torus within a torus within a torus. This is a slice of it, and they're dual. I think Nassim was here at some point. I don't know, some of you might have seen him. Very good model he has. He's really on top of it. I support him a lot. And the dual rotating toruses, this is shown right here. This is a slice looking at the inside of it. It's much more complex than this in a way, but it gives you an idea. And this little dot right here in the center where the two little vortexes meet, we're going to talk about that because that's really one of the keys. But again, this is literally, that's a slice of the same waveform. Okay? It's spinning like a donut. Okay? This is spinning up around the top of me and up from the bottom of me, and it's all around and out from me. 10 feet. I'm carrying it around. Ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. And it's organizing and it's communicating with my body through electrical information. It's communicating through acoustic information. Ions are being sent, blood's going, neutron, everything's happening. And by the way, there's a lot of quantum activity going on prior to all that. And this little waveform that's spinning around, again, that's the slice of it, because I'm going to show these other images to give you, it's dynamic. It's modulating with each beat. If you feel something and you contract, that field contracts. If you feel something and you feel expanded and open-hearted, that field opens and expands. It's dynamic. It's going with your emotions on how you feel. The thing that's really interesting is that an awakened master is not coming from the space that we are normally, the egoic self based in time and past and future time. It has to do with survival, taking care that it survives, right? They're past that. They're coming from a more enlightened viewpoint of their reality. And so, consequently, their waveform shifts and changes because they're no longer modulating with every little bit of stimulus that comes into them the same way we are. They transition to a point past this, and we've looked at that, and we've witnessed it. And it has a certain geometry. It has a certain signature. And that signature, before I get there, I want to talk about this, because this is the other interesting part, because this is what they would mention. It's not about the waveform. But at the center of this energy field that you're carrying is called the phase singularity. This is the scientific terminology for it. All those energies that are moving around Remember, they're frequencies, they're energies. They're spinning around and down and meeting at the heart, and it's a location of the heart where all these energies blend into one amorphous blur, a phase singularity. There is no singular frequency anymore, okay? And out of that 0 point comes the next beat of the heart and the next run of frequencies and the next waveform. And we're refreshing this every beat of the heart. We're refreshing this. And that's a top-down view of the field. And so the energy is spiraling down. You can take a shell or you can take a pine cone and you can look at this. The energy is literally spiraling in to the center point. And at that center point, that's a still point. It's a timeless place. Again, it's spinning two directions, from the top and from the bottom. It's moving around. It's dynamic. It's active. Yet, at the center, right here, where those vortexes meet, it's timeless. So, remember, frequencies are measurements in time, but here we have a spot where it's timeless. Because there's no ways. And Arthur Winfrey came up with this, and I love this analogy because I think it's the best one to use. Imagine yourself at the South Pole. And at the South Pole, you have all the longitude lines coming down to meet you at your feet. Well, when they come close to your feet, where's 10? Where's 30? Where's 60? You see? Out on the field, on the bubble, they're there. But when they meet the point, the singular point, the phase singularity, they dissolve and they become united. But yet out of that phase singularity, which is a quantum zone of existence, comes your next heartbeat. There's a clue there. And this is an image I created to try to help demonstrate in some way this field that is you. It's not metaphoric. This is science. This is you. You carry it. You choose it. You move it. It's dynamic and vibrant. It's always changing. This, by the way, came from Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. I love this image, but I asked him for one, and he's good at it. And the point I'm trying to make here is that the waveform is a geometry. And the geometry has a resonance. And when that geometry has an ideal resonance that's phi-based, magic happens. Magic happens in all sorts of ways. It's idealized by the divine proportion, the golden ratio. And oh, by the way, in the work we did, in the work that Leonard did, when you feel love in your heart, or gratitude or appreciation, the waveform that's produced on the computer has those relationships. It's like fractal to each other, okay? Now, you just imagine with me, you're an awakened master, a bodhisattva, you're already living this state. You have total compassion for every being and sentient life form on the planet, and you care to help them know the change. They're carrying around this waveform that can create magic because it's in resonance with the 0 point. So healing, no problem. Raise the dead? Sure. Wine? Sure. What would you like to do? You know? Because the 0 point is where all creation arises out of. That point is where creation arises. But that's not out there. You're in it. It's literally the amniotic medium that you're living in. You're in the womb of this. This is just to help understand that the golden mean is fractal. I left this in the slide presentation tonight because the Fibonacci is the way things move in this planet. It grows. And almost all objects that arise follow this development. And as it goes farther and farther towards away from the beginning point. This is it right here. This is the sequence. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus, and 5 goes up. By the way, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 numbers there. And yet the last two on these 12, when you put them together, that number 1.6181, that's golden ratio. The relationship, again, is what we're always talking about. The relationship of the frequencies, the relationship of the domains, the waveforms, the relationship of you to someone else, you to something else, and you to the divine. When you produce that through love in your heart, and tenderness and loving kindness for yourself in your heart, and forgiveness for everything in your heart, this relationship develops and anchors in you. And magic can happen from that place. And if you can sustain it to a certain level, you too can have your body not taste death. I put this in here because for this is a pretty savvy crowd right here. Everybody's seen a lot of individuals before me. The human body is in phi relationship. It is already. My body to me is in phi relationship, or Fibonacci relationship. I don't have to create it into that. My physical form already has that. My spine, one vertebrae to the next, one bone to the next, has this relationship, okay, to this domain, which is created through love. And that's the fail-safe. Whoever designed the system here put the fail-safe in. You can't override it by some kind of willpower. You can only do it through. You're trapped here until you learn the skill set to do it. And what we've designed and what we're sharing with you tonight is that the skill set is in your hands. You just have to walk out the door and start. It's not like a rocket scientist type stuff. It's just finding it in your heart to find tenderness and kindness, especially for yourself. This image I put here because this image comes from a picture taken of the shroud that's put through the VPAD analyzer, and then they put some recursive filtering on it. That's an image of a picture from the picture on the shroud. The dimensionality and all of it. This is not created by some artist. This is produced from the actual shroud. This man that was in that shroud knew the science of producing pure compassion in his being. And as the image shows us, when your heart ignites to the divine, there's no turning back. Once you're awakened, you can't become unawakened. Once you become knowledgeable, you can't say, oh, I don't like that, I think I'll forget that and move on. And I think right now, because the shroud and the image is showing us, I think that it's this time for all of us that we're going to be learning this skill set. It's not a mystery that you have to go to a mystery school to attain. It's something innate. It's something you're born with. It's your own personal inheritance. And I think that generating the immaculate, sacred, or purified heart is something that each one of us will be doing over the next period of time. You'll have that opportunity. And I think as we start to talk about this more as reality, I'm not talking to you tonight about metaphysics. I know this is a metaphysical library and a beautiful one and probably the best in the country. But literally, this is coming from the science. I'm sharing with you tonight literally what we know from a grounded, replicable understanding. And I think that's valuable to know. Because a lot of times the mind goes, yeah, but you can spend all your life doing that and you're not going to get anywhere and I'll probably go hungry or I'll lose my car. The opposite is true. And I must say that the opposite is absolutely true. This image, which you find everywhere, is what the Buddhists would call, that's what you're looking for. Feel it. It's what you feel as a mother for an infant that's yours. It's non-judgmental, pure caring. That's all it is. It's a level of caring and belief and faith that's present at that time. And that's why this is such a powerful image that we find throughout the religions.
It's from the Vatican.
Yeah, no, this is over the St. Peter across the wall. This one. Anyway, this image I like on the Sistine because when I talked with Matthew Fox about his idea of compassion and attainment of this state, he gave me this quote that I've used over and over on my website and a lot of other places. I use it in the book. Compassion is touching and being touched by the micro and the macro and being conscious of it. And that's accurate. And if you meditate on this statement, the more you meditate on it, the more accurate it is. So, ascension, okay, is literally nothing more than a phase transition of the physical form to a higher form of symmetry. The symmetry, again, the waveform we're talking about, and that's what we're looking at transitioning to. Now, I'm almost finished here tonight, but I have one more area I just want to cover for you. And there's a topic out there that some of you that might find it interesting can Google or look into. And the topic is sonoluminescence. I share this with you. It's in my book, and I go into it in some detail in the book because it's really quite interesting. But sonoluminescence is an actual process that occurs when you take an oxygen bubble or some other gas and put it in a liquid like water or another liquid, and you take pulsing waves of energy, acoustic energy, sound energy, and you bombard this molecule of oxygen. And what happens is, in very slow motion, I mean, it happens very fast, but in slow motion cameras, you'll see this oxygen bubble expand and become really, really bright. And then it implodes on itself and disappears. The light that's given off is between 10,000 and 1,000,000 degrees. It's hotter than the sun by a lot. But no heat is transferred into the liquid. So Lawrence Livermore and Brigham Young and down at the University of Southern California at Santa Barbara have been looking into this extensively, and many other people, because it's a mystery. It's also a mystery on the process of how it happens. They know mechanically what goes on, but how does this bubble expand and contract and disappear with no energy being released into the medium? And I would suggest that this model is a concrete example of what ascension or the attainment of the rainbow body is. Not that the model is the exact same thing, but it's a concrete example to understand it because no heat is given. Remember, the shroud is produced with light, bright light. This happens in picoseconds. The shroud was created in picoseconds. This thing produces huge amounts of light and energy, but none is transformed into heat to heat the water. The reason they're interested in this is to try to produce an energy source that's cheap, but they're not getting any energy from it.
About the light.
It disappears. It implodes so perfectly. Well, they can't produce enough of it like that. The energy literally implodes. So this process I would recommend just looking into, and again, it's in the book. But when this process happens, there's a model that I've used that I like, where at the event horizon of this imploding waveform, there's a virtual photon release. Okay? It's called Hawking's radiation. But that radiation is released at the edge of the waveform. Remember I said your waveform goes out at least 10 feet from your body. And this waveform, when it produces, this process, when it occurs, again, it's a mystery to science. They're trying to come up with a model that allows it to occur. Because there's always a problem. They say, well, it could happen like this, but this wouldn't be happening. And it could happen like this, but this wouldn't be happening. And the same thing again with the shroud, as we all have heard from before, that the models just don't fall into place. So I like to leave with a few images here, simply to leave you with something to see. If you'll note, when you start to look at spiritual icons, you'll notice things in them that they're pointing to. And here, you notice this form, this vesica form in the ancient painting around Jesus. By the way, this is the Ascension image. This reflects something we know in geometry and math to reflect the golden mean. It's a symbol that's showing something. It's not only showing his body and his rainbow body, the body of light garment, but they're imaging, they're giving you information on top of that. Again, you'll see the same thing here. And this goes on and on. You can go through image after image, and not just in Christian tradition. You can look in the Buddhist tradition. Why do they look at tankas? Why do they have these images that are so valuable and important to them? Because if you look at these images, you start to reflect what that image represents. We understand that in science. There's a new topic I was sharing with Len the other day on mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are showing us that that's the way we learn things from an emotional process. So by looking at images and understanding what the images mean, we become more like that which we are calling into. Children become more like their parents by looking at their parents do things. They learn these processes. But on top of that, you see these little squiggly lines? These lines that are here too in the background, and the blue. This color and these imagery of the energy imploding, representing this. The blue, by the way, when an individual is attaining this process, which sometimes the rainbow body at death can take anywhere between 3 to 7 days. That's the Buddhist literature, okay? But at some point, that's when they're doing it at the moment of death. If they're not doing it at the moment of death and they're doing it during their wakened state, then it happens very fast. It happens in hours. But these individuals here, when they attain this, the body becomes translucent and starts to glow. And there's a bluish haze that's to it. And if you look at a lot of the Christian traditions, you'll see this bluish garment put on a lot of the individuals, whether it's a robe or around the body. And it's reflecting information to us about the process of attainment. Because this bluish glow that happens at the very end, before the actual final transition, is important. What it's telling the initiate is this individual has attained this state. He's sitting on the lotus, which is the heart, which is the symbol for transformation. He's sitting on it. He's attained it. He's gained transformation. And so they see it. And just to point out this little thing up at the top with the little bubble around it, it's just very interesting once you start to know the symbology of all these little pieces. And here's another one where the actual spinning energy going in where? At the heart. And it's because the heart is your main oscillator. It's the rhythm regulator. It's the thing that has to stop for you to die. It's the part that controls the whole process from this level of existence. In actuality, it's my belief that it's the soul. Consciousness, when it frees itself completely from its forms of identity, identity is what keeps you in form. And identity can be faceted, as we all know. I'm a dad, I'm a doctor, I'm a this, I'm a that. But at the core of identity, you have the egoic self, past or future identity. You have the heart, which is in the present moment. And you have the soul, which is timeless. And those are your main components, as Jesus said in the beginning, as I showed, to your identity. And when you surrender all aspects of self, like Sri Yukteswar said, back to the divine, at that moment you attain the next level of existence. Okay? It's an actual process. And this is the final image, because this image of gaining the garment of light and what you'll find in the physics on Hawking's radiation and topics like superconductivity, which are also in the book because they relate to this process. When a superconductor is produced, it produces a field that produces a single frequency, a single phase within its field. Yet it can take all the energy in at once, and yet it doesn't dissipate any energy within itself. It's a very interesting topic to look up and to see. And I really appreciate all of you for coming tonight. I hope I'll answer your questions now, and I can take as much time in the back later on as that is needed. Yeah?
They talk about conscious exit. Some people allegedly leave through heart, some through ajna or third eye or whatever, and some through crown.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then some people talk about a higher heart.
Mm-hmm.
When Timothy Leary and Ram Dass were talking, Ram Dass pointed here, and Timothy Leary pointed here.
Right.
So, can you answer that?
Yes. Well, first off, the heart's connected to all these different points. And you can go, if you're in Tantra, it can start down here, okay? So it can begin anywhere, and you can use other places. This is the transformation point from several traditions of understanding higher wisdom, okay? It's also the point that's required for transformation, for changing the neural patterning of your belief system, of who you think you are, what you are, of the actual way the electricity moves so that you can imagine the actual process. So in meditation, concentration and contemplation are the two facets that make up meditation. Contemplation and concentration. Those two pieces are what you work on to develop that. And a lot of individuals use this place as a point of reference to gain certain skill sets, okay? But in the end, I share this with you, it starts and is actually hardwired through the heart. And so when you gain, if you want a more direct path, like the Essenes had the heart meditation, you can go to the Sufis and the heart and the beloved and the lover. It's a more direct path for attainment. Because in the end, what you're doing, what we found, is that you're looking at a way of producing internal coherence, order, harmonic balance, okay? A specific type of harmonic balance within the energy waves. And when you're doing that, you're ordering that waveform that we saw on the picture, this bubble of energy. And when you're ordering that, it changes what it's in resonance with. So resonance, on all occasions, whatever you resonate with and resonate to, will attract to you certain things, law of attraction, but at the equal and same power, it repels the opposites from you. Okay? So whenever you're in resonance with something, remember that it's not just attraction, it's also maintaining a barrier of other things from you. So if what you're looking for this to attain, then you need to surrender those other things to a certain degree in order to attain this final goal and result. I hope I answered that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
I'm curious, do the other chakra points or the other points on the body also create a field around those areas? Have you guys checked that or seen that?
I'm not looked into that. I've been with individuals that have looked into this, and they say yes.
Okay.
Okay? But a way to view it is that you have this big waveform, okay? And this waveform goes out and out. It gets finer and finer. And it has access points for information, right? Stimulus that's coming to you. And that stimulus is coming to you in many different areas, whether it's electrical, like where I'm seeing you now, and I'm picking it up and you're hearing me. But there's also quantum information coming to you. I mean, in real time, we know now that this event just happened about 3 to 6 heartbeats ago. We're just catching up, in time. Yes?
On this point, I actually read something not long ago. They said that in measuring the electromagnetic fields, that the heart generates one 5,000 times greater than the brain.
It's at least 60 times more powerful than the brain, okay? The point is, we used a brain device that's really small. The field, the amplitude and the energy of it is very small. The heart's a very powerful rotor and oscillator. I like the term oscillator because an oscillator is something that mechanically organizes rhythms. And that's what the heart's trying to do, is produce balance. It's always trying to find the balancing point. I speed up, I slow down. I speed up, I'm trying to slow down. I'm trying to find the still point and the balance. And when you stay in that balance point, that's when joy arises and peace arises out of that place. But it's much more, all of the other, I like to call them oscillating platforms, the architectures of the body, whether it's an organ or other system. I mean, the heart's an organ as well. It produces hormones that are very important for wellness and health, and especially the ones produced during loving moments or touch. Some of them help cleanse the body from adrenal cortisol contaminants that get anchored in the body. So it's much more than a pump for pumping nutrients. In fact, trying to understand how the heart can pump the nutrients through I don't remember off the top of my head, I have it in my notes, but how many miles of arteries and veins and capillaries there are in your body to get the nutrients to the cells. It's impossible in some way to figure out the mechanical nature that enables that to happen, So, yes?
On TV the other night they did the heart and they said it was 60,000 miles. Everything was taken all out. But I have one simple question.
60,000 miles.
Have you read the Urantia book at all about the resurrection and what it says occurred at that point?
No, I haven't.
That might be something to look at.
Okay.
Because it said they dissolved the body.
Yeah.
They didn't want to leave the physical form. And the resurrected Jesus showed up outside with the stone still in place. So they said they were allowed to.
The physical rainbow body dissolves. Even when Sri Yukteswar left, he didn't corrupt. He didn't go in a rainbow body, but he didn't corrupt. But a couple days later, he came to Yogananda. If you read the autobiography of a yogi, there he is. He comes back to him physically, Yogananda gives him a hug. He cries, he weeps, he talks to him. Where are you going? And he explains to him, I'm doing this now. I have another job to do. You won't see me again because I'm leaving. It's a whole other existence that I'm going to operate on.
I've never figured these 19 visitations in 40 days after the crucifixion was the same body that was in there.
Well, because there's a window of opportunity after you've attained these, whether it's in the Christian tradition or not, there's a window of opportunity for the individual to come back, okay, and to relate information. Because they surrender their body back, but you're holding your body here through a process. And once they've reached a certain level, they understand the process. The thing is that normally they don't maintain that. So they're on to the next level. But through compassion, they come back to actually give one last, teaching to whoever's there. And normally it's a teaching about what's going on the other side. So if you can do this, the Gospel of Thomas, the first saying says, whoever understands these sayings will not taste death. And I believe that's accurate. That's not metaphoric, that's accurate. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah?
After the break, one of the slides that you had was, a large part of the slide was quoting from the New Testament and, about the
Mhm.
2 greatest commandments, and then you got down, though, to this the sentence about 1,000 half-loves must be forsaken in order to have a whole heart, if I'm quoting that right. That last sentence I just repeated back is not from the New Testament. Well, the rest of it was. Do you know what the source or tradition is for that last sentence about the 1,000 half-loves, etc.?
Yes, it's Philip.
Philip?
The Gospel of Philip, Gnostic text.
Okay.
He puts it a little bit different.
Okay.
He goes into Mary Magdalene. There's a lot of other Christian tradition here,
Just wondered where
besides
that
the Christian tradition that we normally discuss and talk about. The Gnostics have a whole other side to them that's quite nice. Even at the time of Jesus, there were places you could go to, a man and a woman, and surrender your stuff like in an ashram and go experience the self-existent self, the Hellenistics. They had actual places. They weren't in Palestine so much. They were more in Egypt and Antioch and Syria and Damascus. But these centers existed. And the problem with it is that sharing that information conflicted with the ruling class that was holding Jerusalem at the time. And so there was a lot of other... The other thing is that throughout the archaeological studies, we know that there were Buddhists and Hindus that had places in Egypt along the Nile next to synagogues. Remember, the Buddha lived 500 years before Christ came along, right? And the Hindus had traditions long before that. And they were trading constantly with Rome during that time period, right up the Nile, in the Red Sea. And also along the Silk Path over to Damascus, the King's Highway, bringing goods from China. And they were Buddhist and, Hindu and Jainist and other traditions that were around then. And in the marketplace, they'd share these ideas. So they were around. It's just it wasn't cool to do it in Jerusalem.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just wondering, what would be the point of ascension versus just regular old death? Don't you end up sort of reuniting with your inner being, your God self?
That is a beautiful question. That's really one we should talk to, okay? If we just have another minute. From the philosophies, your soul is let's talk about it from a scientific perspective. Let's say your non-local self is your soul, your Atma, and let's say that's running along in eternity. It's looking to evolve to become a son of God. And that takes a certain process, but there's no God, let's say, pushing the issue, because there's really no time. So you can have as much of this, you call it time, as you want to get the process right, to attain that, to become just like him or her or it or universal consciousness, let's say. So from my perspective, and I'm talking from what the masters say, because I'm like you, we're in the same game here. We're running on the treadmill trying to catch up. But what they tell us, okay, is that this is your job here. Your job is literally to attain that state, because that's the gift that you've been given to do that. And if you don't take and accept the gift of being able to do that, it's like turning down something from, universal consciousness. So they put it in a way that, yes, it's very different and it's very important. You're on this wheel moving through time, space, and it's very painful for most of us. And what they're sharing with, there's a way to learn to get off it, and it's through love. And it's that simple, and compassion. Okay? There's a big difference.
That's good.
Okay? I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you for coming.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.